John woke up to a loud crash and the smell of burning fuel. He groaned and opened his eyes, feeling disoriented and confused. As he looked around, he realized that he was in an airplane that had crashed, its wing torn off and its body scattered across the ground. He tried to move, but pain shot through his body, and he realized that he was injured. Is anyone there? He called out weakly, but there was no response. He tried to remember what had happened, but his mind was hazy and he couldn't recall anything. He tried to reach for his phone, but it was nowhere to be found. As he lay there, he heard footsteps approaching, and he looked up to see a group of people walking towards him. They looked calm and composed, as if nothing was wrong. Are you okay? One of them asked, smiling, extending a hand to help him. What happened? John asked, still feeling disoriented. We crashed, the person replied matter-of-factly. But don't worry, everything is under control. John was puzzled. How were they alive? How were they so calm? He looked around and saw that the other passengers were also behaving oddly. They were just marching ahead with a dead look in their eyes. As they walked towards a nearby clearing, John saw that there was another airplane waiting for them. It looked like a large private jet, sleek and modern, with luxurious interiors and comfortable seats. But something about it made him uneasy. As they boarded the airplane, John noticed that the crew members were also behaving strangely. They didn't seem to be concerned about the crash. Instead, they were welcoming and handing out drinks to the passengers with a smile on their faces. What's going on? John asked one of the crew members. Just sit back and relax, the person replied with a smile. We'll take care of everything. The plane took off, but John couldn't shake off the feeling that something was not right. He looked around and saw that the other passengers were all staring ahead, their eyes vacant and unresponsive. Suddenly, the airplane shook violently, and John felt his stomach lurch. He looked out of the window and saw that they were flying through a storm with lightning flashing all around them. As the turbulence grew worse, John started to panic. He looked around, hoping to find someone who could help him. But the other passengers were all still unresponsive. Just when he thought things could not get any worse, the airplane suddenly plunged downwards, and John felt himself being thrown forward. He braced for impact, but it never came. Instead, he found himself waking up in an old and rickety airplane with torn seats and rusty seat belts. The passengers seemed strange. They were all dressed in clothes from the 1960s and had as vacant a stare as the passengers before. What's happening? John asked one of the passengers. We're going to crash, the person replied, without a hint of fear in his voice. John tried to calm down, but he couldn't shake off the feeling of dread that was building up inside him. He looked out of the window and saw that they were flying through a dense fog with no visibility. Just when he thought things couldn't get any worse, the airplane suddenly lost altitude, and John felt his heart skip a beat. He closed his eyes and prayed for a miracle. But when he opened them, he found himself waking up in yet another airplane. This time, the airplane was a cargo plane with no seats or safety features. John was strapped to a crate, his body sore and bruised. He looked around and saw that the other passengers were all animals, mostly dogs and cats, who disturbingly had the same vacant stares as the human passengers that came before. As the airplane took off, John felt himself being thrown around. He looked down at his hands, which were tied to the crate, and he realized that he was stuck. He had tried to free himself, but the ropes were too tight. He looked around and saw that the other animals were also trapped, some in cages and some in bags. They stared at him as if they knew what was about to happen, but didn't seem to care. John felt a surge of anger and frustration. How could this be happening? What had he done to deserve this fate? He tried to remember his life before the plane crashed, but his memories were fading fast. Just when he thought that he couldn't take it anymore, the airplane suddenly shook and he felt his body being thrown forward. He closed his eyes and waited for the impact, but it never came. When he opened his eyes, he found himself waking up in a military transport plane with soldiers and weapons. They were flying over a war zone with explosions and gunfire all around them. John felt a sense of despair wash over him. How many times would he have to go through this? Was there no way out? He looked around and saw that the other passengers were all soldiers who looked stoic and resigned. He tried to talk to them, but they ignored him, as if he wasn't even there. He looked out of the window and saw that they were flying towards a mountain range with no way to avoid it. As the airplane crashed into the mountainside, John felt himself being thrown forward. He closed his eyes and waited for the end, but it never came. When he opened his eyes, he found himself in a commercial airliner with families and children. They were flying towards a tropical island with clear blue skies and sandy beaches. John felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe he could break the cycle. He tried to talk to the other passengers, but they ignored him, as if he wasn't even there. He ran to the cockpit thinking, if they won't stop it, maybe I will. None of the staff put up a fight and he managed to enter. The cockpit was empty, no pilot or second pilot to be seen. John got behind the control, but to his surprise, he wasn't able to make his hands pull the plane up. It's like his hand also wanted to push the plane down, which they did. He looked out of the window and saw that they were descending towards the island with palm trees and sunshine. He thought he let his hands do whatever they wanted, as it didn't seem that they could crash. But his hand suddenly pushed the controls all the way down, causing the airplane to nosedive into the ground, and he felt his body being thrown forward. He closed his eyes and found himself waking up in yet another airplane. When he realized he was stuck in an endless loop, forced to go through one plane crash after another. There was no escape, no way out. He was doomed to repeat this nightmare over and over again until the end of time. As he looked around, he saw that the other passengers were finally seeming to empathize with him, their eyes vacant and empty. But they understood what he was going through. They had all been in this situation when this was all new. They were all trapped in this endless cycle, just like him. at the one vacant seat, his seat, and proceeded to walk to it. He sat down and buckled up. He was trapped in this endless purgatory, doomed to suffer for all eternity. And so he just sat, eyes staring blankly ahead, waiting for the next plane crash to come. But that was all that was left, an endless cycle of suffering with no end in sight.